All right, my people. So, VA once again failed veterans, and here not just any group of veterans, not us young bucks. I guess I can't say I'm a young buck anymore, gray hair and all, but not just the young bucks here, not just the middle bucks like myself. No, the old timers. So VA again is screwing vets, but not just any vets. No, we're talking about the Vietnam veterans, the veterans that really deserve a fair shake from the agency, and yet they just can't seem to get it right for these folks after 5 decades of these veterans fighting and fighting and fighting for benefits. VA just can't seem to get it right. So what's going on here? Well, come to find out, VA OIG in a very recent report uncovered that the VA has wrongly not paid out benefits up to $1 billion, impacting upwards of potentially 70,000 veterans, maybe more, depending on how you do it, how you shake it out. So what happened? Basically, in 2021, the National Defense Authorization Act passed, and pursuant with Nehmer, certain benefits actions were supposed to happen. So in that, they granted a presumption. The presumption was for conditions like bladder cancer, hypothyroidism, and parkinsonism. Okay, so this is what was supposed to be, being adjudicated, getting these veterans the benefits that they're entitled to. And so what happened? OIG inspected to see if the VA had contacted all the veterans that at least OIG thinks they should have contacted, to make sure that they were aware. What happened? Not only did VA, according to IG, not contact everyone that they should have, but out of a survey of, I think it was 80 plus thousand veterans, of that group, 36,000 were not properly adjudicated. And according to IG, it resulted in, quote, $836.8 million in unpaid benefits just for that small population. And that is from within the sample size. That's not just the full scope of the problem. And IG estimates, as far as question costs, $1 billion. Again, 1 billion with a B dollars that the agency may be on the hook for, that they had not already paid out like they were supposed to. So what exactly happened? According to a senior VA manager or management, and I'll just quote this, quote, a VA senior management advisor stated VHA records were not involved in readjudication determinations because VBA did not have ready access to VHA diagnosis data. Now, isn't that convenient and yet kind of odd, like kind of a kick in the face when it comes to how much money that American taxpayers have invested in these systems that are supposed to be helping VHA communicate with VBA, so it's Veterans Health Administration, communicate with Veteran Benefits Administration to make sure when they're adjudicating our disability compensation benefits that they have all the evidence that they need at their disposal to figure this out. And so what ended up happening, a couple things. Apparently, VHA did not have access to all these medical records. That's what is stated in the summary. But then when you read through the actual report itself, it tells us a little bit more. That VBA did not send out notification letters, that affected veterans and their survivors were not provided with adequate notice. Apparently, what else did they say? They said that there was also a disagreement, of course, with respect to what VBA thinks that VBA is supposed to be doing. And come to find out, they're not even following their own benefits manual. So that's great. Adding insult to injury, what else do we have here? So apparently, they also were skipping steps. So they were looking for claims that were apparently pending after January 1, 2021, with respect to the NDAA that passed that year, but not claims that are earlier, which is part of the requirement of Nehmer. So what's supposed to happen, and I'm going to totally paraphrase a bunch of case law here, but what's supposed to happen is they were supposed to adjudicate even prior denied claims now that these conditions that I mentioned before, like bladder cancer, hypothyroidism, and parkinsonism, now that these are officially presumptive conditions, VBA is supposed to go back into the record for veterans that are denied those cases in the past, supposed to readjudicate, fix it without the veteran doing anything. The money is just supposed to go in there, get handed out, end of story. And what if the veteran has died, it's supposed to go to the widow, so on down all the way to the estate. Anyway, so they're skipping steps. They're not looking at VHA records because supposedly they don't have access to these. Now, that brings up another point. So for some of you watching this may not know, I'm a VA accredited attorney. My name is Benjamin Krause. I've been an attorney for over a decade. I've been fighting for veterans, not even on Capitol Hill and elsewhere, even before I became an attorney, as just an advocate, doing my part to try to make sure that veterans are well informed about our benefits and to make sure that people don't have to deal with some of the struggles that I've had to deal with. Well, I'll tell you what, these Vietnam veterans, they just keep getting it over and over and over with the Department of Veterans Affairs, not just magically, not processing, just the occasional billion in benefits, apparently. So here we are, noticing that, again, they're not doing it. They're not following through with the Nehmer requirements. And now in response to this, so here's what VA is going to do, right? This is what they're going to do in response. Apparently, there was a little bit of a disagreement about whether they were going to follow whatever OIG said that their recommendation was. And part of their rationale was that they felt that OIG recommended that they just do more than they should. It was just too onerous on the poor VBA. VBA is working really hard, folks. They just don't have the ability to adjudicate everything. So instead, they're going to look more specifically at some cases, but not as broadly, perhaps, as at least OIG thinks that they should. Again, this is just, it's not me saying this. This is just what OIG believes that they should be doing. It would be great if one of these days they finally just could all agree, hey, let's help these Nehmer folks out. Let's make sure that they get the benefits that we, promised them. But instead, they just can't seem to figure it out. And so here's, basically what they're saying is they're going to go back now and they're going to double check, but they're going to be more restrictive with this working group than what OIG had recommended. And now in this instance, it's funny how VBA tends to pick and choose, right? So sometimes they'll try to follow their VA manual and claim that's all they're required to do and not necessarily how it's explained in the courts. And then in other instances, they'll lean on the courts whenever it supports what they're going to be doing. So this will be very interesting to see what happens as now that Chevron doctrine has been overturned, to see how much latitude VBA gets when these cases go up to the board, to the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, and then on up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it's going to be very interesting because VBA is not going to get the same level of deference that they have received, the same amount of latitude that they've received in the past. But anyway, it is what it is. And so OIG says you got to hold to the manual. VBA cried foul, said, no, we don't. And now they're getting into essentially how they're going to be, in probably a more restrictive way, evaluating which veterans they should have provided the support to and which ones they didn't. But again, I thought this was pretty interesting because you don't see it very often when VBA pushes back. But in this instance, through the undersecretary, and so Josh Jacobs, the extraordinary undersecretary that he is, the inventor of all things PACT Act and everything else that they had claimed, was doing just such a great job when he took over. Now we're finding out that, in fact, there have been some pretty significant errors that conveniently started when he actually took over as, I believe, the acting in an acting capacity. So again, kind of interesting, but we're now seeing the fruit of how this works out. But basically, VBA claimed that OIG incorrectly concluded that medical records anywhere in VA's healthcare system at the time of a prior claim can trigger the requirements of the stipulation, meaning Nehmer, even if those records were not relevant to the claim or associated with the claim file. Now that's interesting, right? Not associated with the claims file. So VA is in theory, constructive custody of these, and yet, well, if a VA adjudicator didn't place those into the file, then that's a problem. And so what I think is probably happening here is that VA is likely relying pretty heavily on AI, and as a consequence, they're basically stepping through some of these hurdles and steps without a human catching it. They're just kind of following the track, and they're not really thinking, and they're not assessing what's happening in front of them. So anyway, very interesting. They're not looking at evidence that happens to be there. Now, lately, some of my clients have been having problems with VA where they go in for their disability compensation exam, and happening more and more, these examiners do not have access to the medical records when they're doing the exam. And I think that that's what happened here. And now I'm speculating, but I think what happened here, because again, they're saying that VBA adjudicated this without access to the medical records. Well, that's not great. But additionally, I would speculate that some of the examiners that may be involved here, some of these private companies that are providing these for-profit exams for veterans in this context, are just not, they're not getting the medical records, or the medical records aren't being considered, or the evidence that the veterans are presenting is not also being considered and addressed by an examiner. Now, these are all major red flags, major problems. And so here in this instance, wow, we had a pretty major issue come up, and they're saying basically that implicated here. So OIG estimates that 80% of the veterans in the VHA dataset and 99% of the veterans in Camp Lejeune dataset identified by OIG had medical records in the VA claims file showing a diagnosis of NDAA condition while a claim was pending during the review period, but now there's apparently some problems. So, well, golly gee, that would sure be great. But luckily, OIG and VBA do agree, at least, that veterans who had such medical records in their claims files while a claim was pending warrant readjudication. No kidding. No kidding. Wow. Especially for Nehmer, and especially for these elderly veterans that are most certainly very disabled. If they have these conditions, I would say that they're most likely very disabled, and they're very elderly. And, some of them probably, because of the consequence of the disabilities, can't even read very well. And so they're relying on an agency that's not providing them adequate notice. Even if it does, they're not actually going to look at the evidence that the agency already has. They're not telling the veterans that they're not doing it. And so who's the wiser? It's just like the hear no evil, see no evil, do no evil, that interesting monkey meme. So anyway, that's what I wanted to bring to you. Again, my name is Benjamin Krause. I am a veteran rights attorney, work on veteran benefits issues and veteran rights issues across the agency. Veteran readiness and employment is a big thing that I work on. Compensation claims for disabled veterans is another. Med-mal, you name it. So we're in the mix on a lot of different issues, and wanted to bring this story to you because I thought that it was super important. So if you're a veteran that's affected here, or you think you might be affected, I would encourage you to reach out to a VSO that you trust. If you can't find a veteran service officer that you trust, or a veteran service organization, I would encourage you to reach out to a attorney like myself. This is what we do, and we fight for veterans that are wrongly denied benefits. So this seems to kind of fall in the middle, where the denial wasn't properly adjudicated and the veterans weren't giving notice. So that's super interesting. But anyway, we're here to help, and so are your local VSOs. If you find one you trust, we're all here in it together to try to hold the agency accountable and make sure that the veterans get the benefits they're supposed to, because God knows if we're not pushing on the federal government to do the right thing, nobody's going to do it. So anyway, until next time, God bless and have a great day.